Welcome back to the Chess Goals YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to look at the top 10 openings for Black. This is based on club level players rated between 1,000 and 2,000 in the last 12 months, April 2021 through April 2022. And we looked at the top 10 for White. This will be the top 10 for Black. And this is based on the chess.com openings page, popular openings, which has 39 different openings to choose from. So let's start with number 10, work our way up to number 1. Keep in mind the overall percentage for Black for club level players is 48% in this data that I'm looking at. So that's kind of the baseline. We expect Black to score 48% and White to score 52%. So going to number 10, we have the Peertz defense. This is sometimes called the Perk defense, but I think it's correctly pronounced Peertz. And this happens after 1e4 on the first move, d6, d4, knight f6. Now, typically in this position, you will see knight to c3 by white to defend the e-pawn, and then pawn to g6. So we have a kingside fianchetto system here for Black, and this is a modern opening. A modern opening meaning that Black is neglecting putting pawns in the center for now, and they are going to use their pieces to develop and then eventually strike back in the center. So that's kind of a modern opening definition in chess. Modern openings start with the pieces and then later strike in the center, whereas classic openings put your pawns in the center right away. So this is number 10, the Peertz defense. I played the Peertz defense for quite a while when I was a younger player, probably in like ninth or 10th grade, maybe up through 12th grade even. I really enjoyed it. You get some attacking games, but you also have to know a ton of theory. Sometimes white can play early f4 and just try to really steamroll Black. So a lot of theory to know, but fighting chess, and it's right around 2% at the Master Plus level for popularity. All right, let's move to number 9. Also at 50.5% for Black, this is the Nimzo Indian defense. The Nimzo Indian, I think, is kind of hard to play for Black. Starts with d4 and c4 for white, knight f6 and e6 for Black. And the idea is after white plays knight to c3, Black pins the knight. This is another modern type of opening. The idea here is white wants to control as much of the center as possible. So white would love to just play e4 here. After knight c3, e4 is threatened, giving white this massive center, and these pawns control all of these squares on the 5th rank. That would be really good for white. What Black is doing is saying, okay, I'm going to delay putting a pawn in the center. There's no pawn on d5, no e5, no c5, and I'm going to fight with the pieces. And if you look at what Black's doing here with the knight on c3 pinned, the e4 square is under control by Black. The knight on f6 guards this square, and oftentimes this bishop will come out to b7, and the bishop will help protect this e4 square. Sometimes the knight jumps into e4, followed by f5, or even d5 is played. So there is this fight for the center going on. It's just Black is waiting a little bit with the pawns and using the pieces first to control the center. So Nimzo Indian defense, this is 3% at the Master Plus level. And actually, I feel like at the Grandmaster level, a lot of players from the white side don't play knight to c3 because the Nimzo is so strong. Like if you look at the latest versions of Stockfish and Correspondence Chess, I feel like the Nimzo Indian has almost just equalized for Black. I think it's really hard to find good ideas from the white side to play for the win. So we tend to see more players now from the white side playing moves like knight to f3 or even g3, which is kind of a Catalan setup to avoid the Nimzo Indian. But I think at the club level, this is actually kind of hard to play for Black. So it's a little surprising that it comes in at number 9. Moving on to number 8. Also 50.5%. This one is not a surprise to me. The French defense, e4, e6. If you're an e4 player, you know the French and you probably don't like to face it. And the reason why is because it's so solid. Black plays e6, d5, and it's very natural for white to push past at some point, putting the pawn on e5. What happens once that pawn gets on e5 for white, the d4 pawn becomes the weakest pawn on the board. And Black will play pawn to c5, attacking d4, and white tends to have the weakest pawn on the board in the French defense. And sometimes white will just outright drop a pawn. So I'm not surprised. This is number 8. I think the French defense is a great opening for club level players. But there's one even better coming up that we'll get to. It's actually ranked 4th. Moving to number 7, we have the Sicilian defense, e4 by white, c5 by black. This is one of the best openings for black. I think in terms of top level theoretical chess against e4, you really want to play e5 or c5 if you're a super grandmaster. Those are moves that are most likely to equalize. The club level, I think c5 is effective because you can have your own pet system in the Sicilian. Like maybe you play the Najdorf, or maybe you play the Taimanov or the Accelerated Dragon. And white has to be ready for all of those different systems. And you're playing aggressively as black. So, one thing that a lot of these openings have in common where black scores well, black is fighting for some quick play, right? Either dynamic play or maybe they want to put pressure on white's center. By playing c5, you're trying to trade off a wing pawn for white's center pawn, the d pawn. And that gives black long term play that can also lead to an endgame advantage. So, Sicilian defense comes in at number 7. I'm not surprised here. This is a great defense for black. And personally, I kind of like the Taimanov Sicilian if you're going to play Sicilian. All right, moving to number 6. We are at 50% for black. So 50-50. This is the King's Indian defense. And one thing you're going to notice now coming up, we saw Peart's defense at number 10 had a kingside fianchetto. There's a lot of kingside fianchetto systems in the top 5. So what happens here is after d4, knight f6, c4, g6, we get the King's Indian defense. Black is going to play d6, bishop g7, and castle, and then later on play e5, striking back at the center. So very similar to the Peart's defense, except this is against d4, and the Peart's defense is against 1e4. This is not the engine's favorite opening. It's not the best at Super GM level, but it's a nice attacking system that scores well at the club level. Moving on to number 5, we're still at 50%. We have the Benoni defense. So the Benoni starts with d4, knight of 6, c4, c5. Very combative system. And after d5, e6 by black. This is kind of hard to play for white. The engine does like white, similar to the King's Indian defense, but it's also this dynamic opening where black tends to grab the initiative and white's trying to constantly hold black's position down, not letting black escape. That's kind of what you want to play for in the Benoni defense. You want to try to control as white and you want to fight for counterplay as black. So I'm again not surprised by this one. I think the Benoni is a very dangerous system to use against your opponents. And I do recommend it from the black side if you want something fun to play that's not too boring. This is a very dynamic system. All right, number 4, the Caro Kann defense. 49.5% for black. Or I'm sorry, 50.5% for black. So this is one where we have a whole opening course on it. Most of our YouTube videos on openings are the Caro Kann. It's the most popular opening we go over. If you look at the popularity, it's increasing even at the Mastered Plus level, all the way up to 6% recently. It's a fighting system. It used to be thought of as kind of a boring weapon, but now there's been a lot of new ideas. The computer has helped revive it, and you can play dynamically with the Caro Kann and create weaknesses and play for the initiative. That's what we try to do in the Chess Goals Caro Kann course. I love that this comes in at number 4. It's a really nice weapon. It's something that once you learn it, you can really always use it, even if it doesn't become your main weapon down the road. Like let's say you play Sicilian or 1e5. You can always have the Caro Kann in your back pocket. Maybe use it as a surprise weapon or when you just want to play solid. So Caro Kann, number 4. I'm really happy to see that. Moving on to number 3, 51% for black. We have the Alekine's defense, another modern system. Scores slightly better than the Caro Kann, and I've seen this before too in the database. Knight of 6 just scores really well for black, and I think the reason why is it's rare enough that oftentimes white doesn't quite know how to play against it. So usually you'll see e5 played, they kick the knight, and then c4, kicking the knight again, it goes back, and then d4, and then d6 gets played. And what tends to happen is white will overextend, and those pawns become weaknesses. But with that said, if you're going against an opponent who is ready for the Alekine's defense, they can play something like the four pawn attack and actually put a lot of pressure on black really early. So that's why I don't like recommending the Alekine's defense. I think I would much rather play the Caro-Kann defense from the black side against e4, or maybe recommend like the French defense to club level players. So this is definitely one where if you learn it, you could score pretty well just because white will create their own weaknesses and then later on you can attack them. Also worth noting, a lot of times in the Alekhine, you do put that bishop on g7, so it's another kind of hyper modern fianchetto type system. All right, number two, 51.5% for black. The Grunfeld defense. This starts out the same as the King's Indian defense. So we see knight f6 and g6. It's in that same family as the King's Indian. And after knight to c3, now d5. And this might look strange because white can take, and after knight takes, they can play e4, building that massive center. That's part of the strategy with this hypermodern system. Black takes on c3. After b takes back, they'll fianchetto the bishop, castle, play c5. White back in the center with the c pawn, bishop on the diagonal, queen on the half open file. This is a really good system at high levels. And if you look at the percentages here, it's been staying pretty solid right around 2% at Master Plus level. And I do think this is a good system at the club level as well. I think it's a really nice way to play against d4. We recommend the Slav defense, but we play it very dynamically. We kind of switch it into a Dutch Stonewall system quite often, or a Note Boom. Those systems, the uh, Note Boom and the Dutch Stonewall, didn't make this list, but I still think that there's a lot of dynamic play and it meshes well with the Caro-Kann. So that's why I recommend starting d5 and c6 for most club level players, even though that didn't make the list, unfortunately. All right, number one. I am very happy to see this. It scores 3% better for black than the Grunfeld even. Like this is blowing the socks off of all the other openings for black. Out of the 39 on the chess.com opening explorer page, we have the Benko Gambit. I've posted a couple videos of wins I've had against FIDE Masters in the Benko Gambit from the black side. This opening helped me get to master level. I will eventually have a Benko course. I guarantee I will make a Benko course at some point. This opening starts out d4, knight of 6, c4, c5, similar to the Benoni. So at this point, after d5, the Benoni is e6. That's a nice dynamic system. The Benko, though, is pawn to b5. You're using this extreme flank pawn on the b file to attack this kind of flank pawn on the c file. And if white captures, then you play a6 and you gambit a pawn. This is a long-term gambit. So what you're going to do is create this situation where you have half open A and B files, right? These pawns will be gone for black. You're going to put your rooks on both files, and you have moves like queen to A5. You put your bishop on the fianchetto square. So again, we see kingside fianchetto for black. That bishop is going to cut all the way across the board. I love the Benko. I'm happy to see it's number one. I'm hoping to do a Benko course at some point. That's our top 10. Perk defense was 49.5% for black. I think I mentioned the percentages incorrectly. So Perk was 49.5, Nimzo 49.5, French 49.5. Then we had Sicilian, King's Indian, and Benoni at 50 for black, Caro-Kann 50.5, Alekhine 51, Grunfeld 51.5, Benko 54.5% for black. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you like playing as black, and what do you not like facing as white? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.